Hello, Adeena Sussman. Hi, Adeena
Hello,
Sussman.
how are you?
I'm good. I'm good, my friend. Hi.
It is still
So,
dark over here in California.
yes, because you are very far away from Tel Aviv and Israel at this moment, right?
At the moment, yes, I am.
At the
I
moment.
am,
Should we
but
introduce you?
not in spirit.
But no, never in spirit. Let's introduce Adeena Sussman. Okay. Full disclosure, Adeena and I are very close friends. We are. We're very excited to see each other.
Sure.
We have seen each other a little on FaceTime. But the Adeena Sussman that is my friend is also Adeena Sussman of Sababa cookbook fame. The cookbook that many of us have been cooking our way through for the last year and couple of weeks, right? September 2019 was when it
Month,
came
year and
out.
a month, yeah.
Year and a
Yep.
month. So Adina's cookbook came out last year, and like many other people on Instagram, on Facebook, elsewhere, we're all just cooking our way through her fabulous recipes. And Sababa, if you have not thumbed your way through it or cooked your way through it, is a very beautiful, user-friendly cookbook. And it's really not surprising that it became such a runaway hit because she's been working her way toward this for the last 20 something years. Just in brief, Adeena Sussman
Surprising to me.
attended, it was surprising to you, but not surprising to the rest of us. Adeena Sussman attended the Institute of Culinary Education, and then she launched her career as a food writer and recipe developer and co-wrote 11 cookbooks, including Cravings and Cravings Hungry for More with Chrissy Teigen. But then a whole life change came about when Adina moved back to Israel, where she had lived some 20 years earlier, got married to her husband, Jay, and then just spent a lot of time cooking, obviously, and also wandering and shopping and cooking and meeting the people in Shuka Carmel in Tel Aviv. And that, in some ways, was really where this whole idea for Sababa the cookbook it came out of that, and obviously all of her experience. And now, right now, at this moment, though, she is back in California. So why don't we sort of start with the present, and we'll work our way backwards. Why don't you fill us in on what brought you back to California a couple of weeks ago?
So, Shana Tova to you and to everyone in Chag Sameach. And it's great to be here with everyone from the Times of Israel. And thank you for supporting Sababa since its launch, Jessica and Times of Israel. I'm here in California because I came out right after Rosh Hashanah to work on the third cookbook with Chrissy Teigen. It is Teigen, you were not wrong, but
But you're
everyone
saying
says
Tegan.
Teigen, tomato, tomato. It doesn't matter.
Got
It's
it.
both.
Okay.
She says that it's actually Teigen, but that people just started saying Teigen, so she just said, ah, and she lets people say whatever they want. So you
it's
got it
like
right,
paprika
actually.
and paprika.
Exactly.
Really
Basil, basil.
basil.
So I like all the culinary references. Very, very good. So
Yeah.
Chrissy and I collaborate on her cookbooks, which means that I move into her home with her husband, the singer John Legend, and we spend our days and nights dreaming up ways to excite people in the kitchen at home with new recipes. And it's a very fun process and very dynamic and spontaneous and requires us to be together in person. So I came out here with the plan of being here until December. Unfortunately, as some of you may have seen, because 11 million people, which is more than the population of the entire country of Israel, liked a very personal post that she put on Instagram last week, sharing that unfortunately she lost her pregnancy at a fairly late stage. So
right.
Heartbroken for her, and really grateful that she shared that, because she seems like she's helped a lot of people with her transparency. Right. But we had decided to put the cookbook on hold actually before that happened because she was on bed rest. I was in quarantine because I had come from Israel. So I decided to finish my quarantine, take advantage of that, and visit my father, who lives 400 miles away in Palo Alto, which is where you see this beautiful
Yes.
menorah studded background, courtesy of my father and stepmother, Betty. So I'm here in Palo Alto. I was able to spend Sukkot with my family, help
build the
dad
sukkah
and his wife, my stepmother, build and decorate the sukkah, and cook. I did not really cook anything from Sababa, which was quite refreshing.
But what did you, come on, give us some highlights of what was served
no
at Stan
tahina glazed
Sussman's table.
carrots. I actually made a recipe from my new book, which we can talk about a little later, which is coming out I'm in the middle of working on my next book, which is all about the foods of Shabbat and how Israelis cook on weekends. So I made my pomegranate and fig braised brisket, sort of used it as the opportunity for a recipe cross test, because I cook the recipes in Israel for my books. I always send them to the United States to be tested by a group of people who, the ingredients are a little different in the United States. Ovens are different.
The salt,
sugar behaves differently.
Salt is different, right?
Salt is a big issue.
Salt is a big
issue. So, so I made that. I made lots of fresh vegetables. There's a nice continuum between Northern California and Israel as far as the produce goes. And I have always felt a comfort level in Israel because pomegranates, figs, persimmons, those are things that I grew up eating. People would drop off. There was such a bounty of fruit out here. People are always trying to offload their
Shout out that Adina grew up in Northern California. So that's so she's basically come back home on this visit.
Yes, I'm in Palo Alto where I grew up.
Wait, Adina, you have to tell us. You have to tell us. You have to tell us about the cheese. About your parents and the cheese.
Happily tell you about the cheese. I don't know.
There's so many
things to talk about.
There are so many things to talk about. You were starting to say that you grew up in a small Orthodox community.
Lots of cooking, learning how to host and entertain and be comfortable in the kitchen. And we made everything because there were no kosher stores really. When I was little, we made our own desserts and chalot and salads, everything was made at home. It was very simple. I was a child of the 70s, so we were not, in Alice Waters' idyllic vision of farmers market cooking. We were Nuco margarine and garlic powder, and we loved it.
Oh yeah.
I was raised to love cooking and to understand that cooking does not have to be elitist and fancy to be delicious, and that is always my sort of coda as I'm working my way through a new recipe. I check myself and try and think, is this something that people are going to feel intimidated by, maybe be excited by, and find a bit of an adventure, but still be doable and delicious. And that's always how I think about cooking. So yeah. So where were we?
Oh wait, the cheese. I want to tell the cheese story. The cheese.
Okay, yes. So my parents came out here in 1966. My father was pursuing graduate studies at Stanford in physics, and they were a young modern Orthodox couple who needed kosher food. So they, in addition to things like getting our kosher meat once a month on freezer trucks from Chicago, and having to remember to pick it up from the conservative shul nearby, my parents decided after one too many trips to New York, where my father schlepped suitcases of kosher cheese back for everyone in the community, that they were going to quite a sight, actually, thinking about him schlepping, and this is the days before roller suitcases, by the way. Days before roller suitcases.
Yeah. But he probably got two suitcases.
Maybe when we used to call it suitcase of valise, probably.
Oh, valise.
Yeah. So they decided to sell kosher cheese. So they contacted Ha'olam and Migdal cheese in New York, and from our rotary phone with the long cord, and somehow they agreed to send cheese to us. Probably we were the poor stepchild of the Los Angeles deliveries, so they decided to add an extra day onto the truck, and these giant 14-wheeler trucks would roll up to our tiny street in Palo Alto, and we had purchased a new refrigerator from Sears, which we made room for in our garage. And I remember filling it every 4 to 6 weeks with the deliveries of, it was like an early game of, dairy Tetris. I had to figure out how to get all the blocks into the fridge. And, the round Gouda always messed everything up because everything else had sharp edges and the Gouda was round.
Throwing it all
but
up.
Yeah, so it was a very, it was a fun and very community-based experience. I grew up in a tight-knit, small community. And it never, eventually Palo Alto became a more developed community for religious. Did I say California? The whole state. Yeah. So anyway, it's now a much more developed place, but once in a while, someone will come up to me and say, "You look familiar, where might I know you from?" And I'll say, "Where are you from?" And they'll say somewhere like Davis, California, which is, not close. And if they're wearing a kippah and they're from Davis, California, I'll say, "Did you used to by any chance buy cheese from S&S Cheese," which was Stan and Steffi, my parents' names in Palo Alto. "Oh my God, yes." So that's the cheese story. I still love cheese to this day.
Yeah.
And just that's the story. So yeah, so love to cook, and
lots of and some of those recipes made their way in a very different form into Sababa. I'm thinking of the triple persimmon loaf, for instance. Right?
The persimmon bread from Sababa, which was very popular last fall. Loaf. It is a loaf. We called it a loaf because bread makes it sound savory. In America, a bread is a cake.
Bread.
Right. Yeah, that, and also my mother's chicken soup, which cooks for 12 hours overnight on the stove, are definitely inspired by my childhood. And my new book is going to allow me to include more of our family sort of weekend recipes, like my mother's very delicious, very simple chicken, where she sprinkled every dried powdered spice under the sun on top of a cut up piece of chicken. And it's like the best chicken in the world.
It's the most delicious.
I made it, we photographed it for the book, and the entire team just went crazy for it. And, it's literally just chicken and some onions and her secret spice blend. So yeah, so it's just very fun to be able to incorporate. The direction I chose with Sababa has sort of set a precedent for me being very personal about the way I present my recipes. And obviously that was very risky with Sababa, because when you put everything out through your personal lens, people either like the lens or don't like the lens. And, there you are with your stories out there. So, but because people seem to really respond to that aspect of Sababa, I'm going to continue along that vein as much as possible with the next book. And I'll be telling the stories behind the recipes, and, in addition to hopefully providing new classics that people want to make on Shabbat or just every night. And also sharing with people the idea that I was reading Abraham Joshua Heschel's Shabbat this weekend, and sort of the idea that, Shabbat is a state of mind. It's about spending time with family, about, freezing what we do regularly to come together and have like a slightly elevated experience of life. And who doesn't need that right now with so much craziness going on? Just the idea that we can create our own bubble once a week of our choosing. I am not dictating how people observe what they observe religiously, but the idea just that we can create a bit of a cocoon, a place where we can escape and maybe put the phones away, talk to our family, not be triggered or stimulated by the outside world. And over food, of course, is something that has always appealed to me and appeals to me more than ever right now.
Right. No, of course. And people, I think it's sort of interesting to think how the coronavirus has spurred so much cooking and baking, the sourdough craze, the cooking craze, how many Facebook groups are out there, one of the groups I'm in, Real Food in the Time of Corona, and everyone just experimenting and trying. For you, it was sort of midway through your year of launching this book.
Yeah.
And aside from the coronavirus, which it's hard to put the coronavirus aside, but okay. What's been most surprising for you about this whole experience of putting this very personal cookbook out there, seeing how people respond to it, seeing how people are cooking from it, Instagramming and messaging with you all the time? What does that feel like a year later?
I would say on a personal level, being included on the New York Times Best Fall Cookbooks list, which is something that I had always looked to for my own cookbook recommendations, was a very surreal and out-of-body experience. And I think a good lesson as a 48-year-old woman that, there's no time stamp or expiration date on, pushing your boundaries, being creative, putting yourself out there, taking risks. And, there's definitely a very, a lot of moments wondering how this book was going to land. So like just the soft landing was a very big surprise to me personally. And then, just seeing people of all religions, cultures, ages, cooking levels, I say cooking from Sababa, but really what I like to think about is reading my book, because it is a book. There's a lot of writing in there, and cooking is my comfort zone, and writing is where I feel like I need to take more risks because it doesn't come as naturally to me. So to hear people enjoy the introduction and buy into the proposition that I make in Sababa about where Israeli food can find a place in everyone's kitchen was just really interesting. Seeing, as someone who I guess is an insider in Israeli cuisine, seeing how it lands on other people, what appeals to people, and also, quite honestly, mentioning somewhat controversial topics like Palestinian food and its influence on Israeli food, and feeling like I did not get punished for my views and my inclusive vision of what Israeli food should be, and giving credit to its origins and roots was also very satisfying for me, and my husband, of course.
Yes, very.
And then Corona, so a cookbook or any book usually has an initial publicity wave and then kind of, settles into a rhythm of falling into the background. And, somehow Corona came along right when that time should have started, and Sababa kind of had a second wave, where everyone was just making preserved lemons and making slug and cooking soups and making challah. I mean, the challahs on Fridays because people were home.
Crazy.
Challah is sort of a multi-hour process, and in Israel, Friday is a day where you can do that. You can set up the dough and leave and come back and leave, because Friday is kind of like the American Saturday or Sunday. But to see so many people in the United States making challah for the first time and asking questions and building a virtual community around loaves of bread was just very fun, and I think sort of a good analog for what was happening with Sababa in general. And also it ushered in my Zoom education, my online cooking class, hazing rituals, and many lectures, many classes, finding a whole new audience for the book. And it was a very interesting, exciting, and quite intense and busy time, actually. Like my quarantine was not sort of a slow, quiet, relaxing time for me, but it was a very exciting time for the book. Yeah. So yeah, it's been very surprising, and it continues to surprise me that people are discovering the book more than a year later. And I think because we're not traveling right now, the choice that I made to really give people an inside view of the Carmel market and my very personal daily life in Israel is a bit of a travelogue in a way. And I know that I'm eager to see other people's travelogues, and I hope that I've been able to provide that for some people.
Right, for sure. Adina, talk to us a little bit about, I mean, it's such an interesting position that you have, the American who had, you know, you had your cooking and food writing chops that you really established in the States. And then you came to Israel, and obviously you were first working by and large with your American clientele, right? Um, and then and you mentioned this in your last comment, you then very much became friendly and collegial with Israeli chefs, of course, because it's a small world over here. And then, of course, you're friends with the Israeli chefs in the States. You know, Michael Salmanov is a good buddy of yours. And then there's all the others, Einat Admoni and Alon Shaya and Mir Masi. I mean, in other words, there's the whole chevra of Israeli chefs in the States. There's the chevra of Israeli chefs in Israel. You're the American chef cooking Israeli food and interpreting it in many ways for everyone. What is that like? What is that position? It's like you're a diplomat almost. It's very
That's,
diplomatic in a certain sense.
I
Or
see
is it?
myself
I don't know.
more as a Sherpa than a diplomat. But I would say, yes, when I had a long career as a food writer in New York. In addition to my cookbook co-authoring jobs, I was writing about Israeli food and wine for a long time, and I did become either professionally, personally, or both friendly with many of the players on the Israeli food scene.
Right.
And when I got the Sababa contract, I had a major oh shit moment where I said to myself, what am I going to add to this conversation about Israeli food that all of these amazing, professionally trained restaurant gurus like Michael Salmanov, Alon Shaya, Einat Admoni, Yotam Ottolenghi, and writers like Jana Gur, you know, legends, Joan Nathan,
Sure.
everyone, so many people have written and talked about Israeli food. But what I realized is that of all of these people, I was the only one who was actually living in Israel, which was kind of shocking to me.
Bizarre.
But, you know, I think some of them may end up, oh, Jana lives in Israel, and Jana Gur is
Right.
an incredible author, chef, wonderful writer. But, you know, of the new crop, I would say, I was. And so, you know, they're all people with Israeli lineage writing about their homeland and living in America, and also mostly sharing their day-to-day is sharing their food and their vision on restaurant.
Right, in restaurants. Right. Mm-hmm.
And here I was, this American home cook who has developed thousands of recipes for home cooks, living in Israel and sort of looking at Israeli food through the lens of a bit of a culinary and cultural outsider, which I decided to work to my advantage because I felt like I could see things through the eyes of someone who maybe for whom they were not inchoate, like just something that they were born with, like to someone like Einat, harissa is like runs through her veins. To someone like me, it's topical. To someone who is in the United States who doesn't know about it, like they might need to put it a bit in context, and to also to see different ways to use it other than the ways that we have all been trained and taught to use them. And that was where I felt like I could really add something different. As a recipe developer, I look at ingredients from like a scientific point of view, from a practical point of view, from a shelf life point of view, from, you know, how can you use this? How can this add something to your home kitchen, to your pantry? What does it lend to the story about Israeli cooking? How can I bring something to life about someone in the shuk or something in the culture, you know? And that was really how I approached the book. And that was where Sababa landed, like an American woman living in the shuk, walking around,
Literally.
trying to get bearings, learn daily, and sort of humbly share and with wonder and amazement share everything around her without seeming like sort of a wide-eyed Pollyanna, you know.
Right.
So
listen, I think it's always it's the nature of being an American in Israel in some ways is like life in translation, but sometimes that life in translation can do some really good things. You can you can
Agree.
sort of live on both sides of the line. And I think you really, I mean, you were able to
And
really
you-
bring that.
Yeah, and you can
Right.
find your little pockets where that other people don't see,
Right.
which is really, I think as a writer and a cook, like putting those together to be a different kind of observer, and also in a culture where the news is often so based upon politics or religion, like to try and share something about the culture through the lens of cooking was really nice for me because I tend to steer away from conflict. But I
It's
did
true.
want to present a new picture of what was going on here. So yeah, so that was kind of how I approached the cooking, and yeah, it's been an amazing journey. And it's interesting because I still live in the shuk and I still cook in the shuk every day. And to these vendors, I'm still just a customer, which I love.
Right.
I purposely decided not to go into the business of giving a lot of tours. Once in a while I'll give a
Food
tour to
tours.
a
Right.
small family or friends, but I didn't want to like alter that sacred relationship that I have with the shuk as someone who goes and shops there. And I didn't want to monetize, to use a modern,
Yes.
obviously I'm not going to say that writing the book didn't allow me to profit or to advance my career, but my daily life in the shuk, and like I wait in line like everybody else. I have to haggle over the rotten strawberry at the bottom of the
Sure.
basket. And I want it that way. And like to me, the shuk is a sacred place, and it was my ulpan into my life in Israel as a new olah. It was where I learned a lot of Hebrew, a lot of cultural nuances, understanding.
What was the shuk like during Corona?
Well, it was closed. I mean,
Right.
was,
but was it, did it sort of open?
Closed. No. I mean, the main shuk was, anything on the main stalls of the shuk were closed, and down at the bottom, there's one street where there were a few produce stalls open. We never lacked for fresh produce, but it was definitely like seeing an artery severed, like in the city. It was very sad. And I had my personal opinions, which I expressed in an op-ed that I wrote for Eater, which is like a culinary website.
Right.
I felt like the shuk should not have been closed when supermarkets were allowed to remain open.
Right.
It didn't feel fair, and the shuk is outside, which to me is a major advantage.
Right. You're actually out in the air instead of being closed in.
Where you can move, you can choose who you shop from and how far you stand from people, as opposed to a supermarket where you often don't have that luxury. So there have been a lot of decisions about that, and the shuk is closed again now. And it's very sad. I'm not there to see it, but it's unfortunate, and it's another, I'd say, symptom of the confusion and tragedy of what's happening commercially with Corona in Israel, and ties into tourism. The shuk is a place where a lot of tourists go. Restaurants, obviously, which are a huge part of my life, and both from a professional and personal point of view, I love restaurants. I view a night at a restaurant like a night of theater. And I spend a lot of time in restaurants, and to see them all closed and to see the chefs, it's really hard to talk to chefs right now. They're really depressed, and
really
they're
hard.
generally ebullient, creative, excited people, and feel for them deeply. And it's hard. It's hard. It's a hard time. And
try using the word pivot. They're all having to do the delivery thing and do takeout, but it's certainly not the same thing.
I mean, they're the lucky ones. I mean, think about your 65-year-old falafel stand owner who barely is on the internet. They're the ones, they don't have the resources to do delivery. They don't know how to advertise. So it's been an interesting time. I think, obviously we will persevere, and the industry will recover at some point from Corona, and there will be new rules, and people will be prepared in different ways for the future. But there definitely will be a lot of businesses that don't survive this from a restaurant point of view.
Right.
Unfortunately for them, but for me, people are cooking more than ever at home and sort of stocking their larders for what's next, you know.
So going to the new book, which
Uh-huh.
is not there's no official name for it yet, although you have a kind of a
I
nickname
believe
for
the
it.
book is called Shabbat. The book is called Shabbat. My non-Jewish editor from Connecticut loves the name, and we have had doubts about it, whether it is inclusive enough. She feels that it's a very alluring word, and that, you know, similar to Sababa, it's just a fun word to say for those that have no meaning or context to it. And like a lot of it's like Israeli kids who name their children Roy because they can pronounce it in both countries. Shabbat doesn't have any of the, you know, the linguistic stumbling blocks of a lot of other Israeli words. And I think, you know, so Shabbat is really going to talk about how we cook on weekends in Israel. And that includes the fact that Friday is this sort of both a day, and sometimes can be a day of casual brunches, and sometimes can be a day of harried preparation for Shabbat.
Friday night dinner.
Yeah. How people enjoy the weekend. Jewish, also other cultures. I'm going to try and even push out a little further from Sababa and, you know, do an Ethiopian Shabbat dinner, an Indian Shabbat, and sort of try and also touch upon the hundreds of thousands of non-Jews who are now living in Israel between the Eritrean and Sudanese asylum seekers and all of the Thai and Ghanaian and Sri Lankan workers and
foreign workers.
Everybody cooks on weekends in Israel.
They do.
And Israel is a very multicultural place. Druze, Palestinian, Bedouin, Arab, you know, so it's all going to be in there. It's the majority of the recipes will be Jewish and Israeli, but Israeli means a lot of different things too. And, you know, I'm interested in sharing that with people. So yeah, but it's going to be similar. They're going to be about, I would say, 70 Sababa style recipes, which are very fresh, produce forward, exciting but easy to prepare, salads, soups, main courses, dishes, and then a lot of ethnic long cooked dishes, things that cook overnight. And I am going to try and bring in like some of the best resources that talk about why Shabbat is special in our culture, both Israeli.
Which is something that you did. You brought in all these great resources in Sababa as well. Another,
you know,
I
think that, you know, these days you can find any recipe you need online, and what a cookbook where a cookbook can add value is with all those other things, the writing, the little additions, the nuances of the book. So I really feel if anyone's interested in writing books, like it's as much about what else you add to the book as opposed to just the recipes themselves, although the recipes have to really kick ass.
What's it like writing this cookbook? I mean, obviously this cookbook has been in development for a while. What's it like writing it during the coronavirus, knowing that people have turned to the kitchen? Does it change anything?
I mean, I think the way that people are interacting with Sababa has influenced how I'm approaching Shabbat. You know, I don't want to do dishes that have 10 components that, you know, I'm into the idea of sort of meal prep, which is a term that has become kind of trendy now. But like Shabbat is the ultimate meal prep. If you really keep Shabbat and don't cook on Shabbat, as some of us don't, then it's about having all the elements ready and just being able to assemble delicious things. And I like that. I like that idea of having sort of a stable of amazing things to put on salads and dressings and different things that you can use to like enhance the simple foods. But it has posed some challenges because I'm approaching the time in the book where I will want to be going into people's homes to cook with them, because those are where the great stories come out. And, you know, describing people's kitchens is such a great way to share their background. So I'm hoping that by the time I get back to Israel in mid-December, I'll be able to visit people at home comfortably and legally.
Let's hope. Let us hope.
Just
And
tell
then
everyone who doesn't know that Jessica and I have been friends for almost 30 years. And Jessica set me up with my husband, Jay, who works for the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. And it's largely because of Jessica that I'm living in Israel and that I was able to write this book. So I owe you a huge debt of gratitude.
well, you know what I say. My line, that's always Adina's line. And then my line always is, I had to get her back to Israel in some way. And as
you
Adina
succeeded.
said to me, what'd you say?
And you
What'd you say?
succeeded.
And I succeeded. And as Adina said, when I realized that she was going away for all these months because she's in Tel Aviv and I'm in Jerusalem, I said, I don't know if I can really handle you being away for so long. And she's like, well, with the Seger, with the closure, it's not like we were going to be seeing each other anyway in person.
Yeah,
So
it's true.
and here's a little secret. We meet, we've been meeting of late
Yes.
at Gems, a great beer brewery and burger and what do we eat there? Pub. Brew pub.
Yeah.
We've been having their burgers and beers on even in the parking lot, in their parking lot addition, because they wanted to spread out. So shout out to Gems. Shout out to Gems. Yes. Anyway, we won't be doing anything together for the next few months, but you'll be in some exciting stages of development, hopefully, of Chrissy Teigen's next cookbook together, working on that.
Yeah, we're talking about picking up the project again.
And she should be healthy and that should be a healthy and happy thing for her to be working on and moving forward on.
I mean, I think what she did is a lesson to all of us that, you know, our personal experiences can really help other people. And for those who might criticize people for overexposing their personal lives, the flip side of that is that somebody may be able to take comfort or see that someone shared an experience with them. And I think that is, just, at the end of the day, a social media post is a piece of writing. And if it's a well-written and thoughtful piece of writing, like any other, it can have an impact. So like, that's the impact that I try to have. And that's the impact that you have, Jessica, with your beautiful writing. And, all of us have that ability is what I would say, regardless of what the medium is or the format,
Yep. Agreed. Well, we miss you over here, and it's a good thing to see you in Palo Alto.
Thank you.
And we thank your father and your stepmom for sharing their dining room. I assume it's the dining room with us here at the Times of Israel. And we wish a continued good Sukkot to you. And
thank you. And I want to wish everyone in Israel, as much comfort and release and freedom as you can have during a really challenging time. During Corona for the beginning of Corona, Israel was, leading the pack in terms of low infection rates. And I was from Israel, trying to comfort audiences in the United States. And, it's just an interesting lesson in, you have to find comfort when you have a lack of personal control over a situation. And I hope that cooking can provide that for people, and reading. And if anyone ever wants to ask me a question, as you all know, I'm very available on social media.
Very available.
Instagram, please follow me on Instagram and ask me any cooking question that you have. I love interacting with people and making new friends and learning through food, and I'm learning from you guys. Like, I always learn from my cooks and readers. So
she's always happy when you do substitutions also. She likes the challenge presented, hearing about the substitutions.
It's true.
All right, Adina.
Thank you, Jessica.
Go to your day. We thank you for coming and talking to us.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you. And I love the Times of Israel website. And I have to say, being in the United States, like, the news coverage has been, the site is really easy to navigate, especially on the phone. I'm not just saying this as a plug, like recently it's really where I feel like it's a clear and sober and relatively neutral place to get information about what's going on in Israel. And I love reading it. So thank you.
A lot of teamwork there. All right. We thank you and hope we see you soon for to talk about Shabbat. The book.
All right. Chag Sameach. Happy cooking. Bye.
Chag Sameach. Bye.